I was ankle-deep in mulch with a trowel in one hand and a root ball in the other when the screech of golf cart tires made me stop mid-shovel. I looked up, and there she was, Pamela Whitlow, president of our HOA, perched on the edge of her floral-patterned seat like a hawk spotting prey. Her bleach-blonde bob looked like it had been sprayed into place with industrial adhesive. She didn't even wait for the cart to stop rolling before hopping off and storming across my lawn. "Jeremiah Palmer, you know full well roses aren't on the approved list of front yard flora," she snapped, pointing at the modest row of rose bushes I just planted along the walkway. "They're not invasive. They're not even tall," I replied, standing up and brushing dirt off my jeans. "And they're roses, Pamela. It's not like I put in bamboo or some jungle monstrosity." "They weren't approved," she said, pulling out a clipboard like it was a badge. "Per Section 6, subsection B of the Greenwood Ridge HOA Landscaping Covenant, all front yard plantings must be pre-approved by the Architectural Committee. You didn't apply." I wiped my hands on a rag and crossed my arms. I didn't think I needed to apply to plant flowers. Pamela's lips curled into that smug, thin line she always wore when she thought she had someone cornered. "Well, now you know, you'll be receiving a fine $1,500. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She whipped out a printed notice and stuck it in my mailbox like it was a parking ticket, then turned on her heel and strutted back to her cart without another word. I stood there in disbelief as she sped off, her little dog yapping in the passenger seat like it was cheering her on. $1,500 for planting roses. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the fine notice in front of me, fuming. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 6 years. I kept my lawn tidy, didn't throw loud parties, paid dues on time, and now I was supposed to cough up $1,500 because I didn't file a form. I picked up the phone and called my sister, Penelope Wallace. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Jay. Everything all right? Pamela just fined me $1,500 for planting roses," I said. There was a pause, then Penelope laughed. "Oh no, she really doesn't know who I am, does she?" Penelope wasn't just my sister. She was the state funding compliance officer for community associations. The HOA's budget, their state grants, their tax filings. She oversaw the programs they depended on to operate, which meant she knew exactly where to look if someone was getting a little too creative with their power. "She's been on our radar," Penelope said. "You just gave me an excuse to dig a little deeper." By the next morning, I had photos of the bushes, HOA bylaws printed out, and a hot cup of coffee ready. This was no longer about roses. This was about Pamela and whatever power trip she was riding through the neighborhood. And I wasn't about to let her run me over. Saturday morning, I was pulling weeds from the backyard when Penelope's car pulled into my driveway. She stepped out in a navy pantsuit and low heels, tablet in one hand, coffee in the other. The look on her face wasn't playful, it was focused, the kind of focus she brought into courtrooms and committee hearings. "You're going to want to sit down for this," she said, barely waiting for me to shut the back gate before walking into my kitchen. She laid her tablet on the counter and tapped it twice. "I pulled their last 3 years of financial reports. There are irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "Misappropriated funds," she said, flipping through screens. "They applied for a state beautification grant 3 years in a row. Claimed they were planting native species in community spaces, maintaining walking trails, and installing energy-efficient lighting. But there are no records of any of those projects actually happening." I frowned. "Where did the money go?" She slid the tablet toward me. "According to their internal budget, which I got through a public records request, they spent nearly 70% of those funds on administrative stipends and strategic consulting." "Pamela," Penelope nodded. "And 2 other board members. They paid themselves. Almost $80,000 over 3 years, all under vague categories. That's fraud, Jay." I leaned against the counter, letting that sink in. "Can we report it?" "Oh, I already did. State Attorney's Office has an open file now." "But that's not all." She tapped again, bringing up a scanned letter. This is from last fall. The HOA sent a letter to the county zoning board claiming to represent unanimous homeowner support for a parcel annexation. They wanted to expand HOA jurisdiction to a neighboring strip of undeveloped land looks like it's being rezoned for commercial use. I squinted at the document. Why would they want that? Because they tried to write an easement into the annexation that would give them 20% of lease revenue from any business that sets up there. They'd have direct control over which businesses get approved. I blinked. Wait. They were going to collect rent from commercial tenants on land they don't even own. Penelope gave a sharp nod. They tried to present themselves as a community development intermediary to the county. It's shady as hell. If it had gone through, they'd be profiting off lease agreements without ever investing a dime. I ran a hand through my hair. So they're laundering grant money, writing fake letters of support, and trying to muscle their way into commercial real estate. And meanwhile, Pamela's driving around handing out fines for flowers like she's queen of suburbia, Penelope added. They think nobody's watching. But now they're on record with forged signatures and fraudulent financials. I looked at her. How do we hit them where it hurts? We take it public, but not just a town hall. We file a formal petition demanding a forensic audit and full board recall. And we get the neighbors on board. I raised an eyebrow. You think they'll listen? Penelope pulled out a printout of the HOA's bylaw amendment process. If we get signatures from 30% of homeowners, we can trigger a special vote. They can't block it. That afternoon, we started knocking on doors. First stop was the Morales family 2 streets down. Angela answered, her toddler clinging to her leg. Pamela fined us for leaving our garbage bins out for an extra hour, she said after hearing what we were doing. We paid it because we didn't want trouble. Penelope handed her a copy of the petition. You won't be alone anymore. We're organizing a recall vote and requesting a state audit. Everything they've been doing is about to come to light. Angela signed without hesitation. Next was Mr. Chen, a retired postal worker. He invited us into his garage where he kept every HOA notice he'd ever received, meticulously filed in dated folders. They fined me for painting my shutters eggshell instead of cream, he said, pulling out a laminated letter. I checked the official color palette afterward. Eggshell is on it, still made me pay, threatened property liens. Penelope scanned the letter. That's coercion, that's illegal. He signed too. By sundown we had 17 signatures. The next morning we had 34. It wasn't just about the fines anymore. It was about the constant fear, the threats, the way they made people feel small in their own homes. We weren't just collecting names, we were building momentum. On Monday, Penelope filed a formal complaint with the State Association Oversight Division. By Wednesday, the county zoning board had rescinded the annexation approval, citing evidence of procedural misrepresentation. The following Saturday, we held a community meeting on the front lawn of the Andersons' house, the only place big enough to fit everyone. We had folding chairs, printed packets, even a local news crew that Penelope quietly tipped off. Pamela showed up halfway through, arms crossed, her face tight with irritation. "This is an unauthorized gathering," she called out. "You're violating HOA meeting protocols." Penelope stepped forward. Actually, under Article 9, homeowner-led assemblies are permitted when addressing board performance, and we're here to discuss the board's misuse of funds and fraudulent filings. Pamela opened her mouth, but Penelope cut her off with a printed copy of the state's investigation notice. "This is a formal declaration from the Office of Community Oversight," she said, her voice carrying. "They're freezing all HOA discretionary spending pending audit findings, effective immediately." The crowd murmured. Pamela turned red. "And this," Penelope said, holding up a second document, "is our petition to recall the board. We have more than enough signatures. The vote will be scheduled in 10 days. Pamela tried to speak again, but this time it was Mr. Chen who stood up. "You fined us for nonsense," he said. "You bullied people who didn't know their rights, but now we know." More voices joined. "Angela, The Andersons. Even the usually quiet Patel couple, Pamela turned and walked away without another word. The next day, I found someone had cut the heads off my rose bushes, but I had security cameras. And the footage clearly showed Pamela stepping onto my lawn at 3 in the morning with garden shears, wearing a hoodie and gloves. We sent the footage to the HOA's insurance provider, who immediately suspended liability coverage for the board due to destructive conduct by an acting officer. Penelope also forwarded the footage to the investigating attorney, who added property destruction and harassment to the growing list of charges. Pamela didn't show up for the recall vote. When the ballots were counted, the results weren't close. 92% of homeowners voted to remove the entire board. By the following week, a temporary committee had been appointed. Their first act: rescinding every fine issued over the past 12 months and refunding collected penalties. The roses didn't survive, but I replanted them. This time, the whole neighborhood helped. The new interim board met for the first time that Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, a beige stucco building that had spent the last year being used more as a stage for Pamela's power plays than for anything useful. Folding chairs were set in neat rows, and the turnout that night was the largest I'd seen since the neighborhood's founding barbecue 5 years ago. I sat near the front with Penelope, who wore a forest green blouse and black slacks, her tablet resting on her lap like a shield. Beside her, the newly elected finance chair, a retired CPA named Darlene McCready, stood at the head of the room. "We've reviewed the preliminary documents submitted by the former board," Darlene said, adjusting her glasses. "And we've found a number of unexplained withdrawals, all routed through an entity called Sycamore Strategies, LLC. A few neighbors looked around, murmuring. Penelope leaned toward me. "Sycamore doesn't exist in any state registry. It's a shell. Likely created to launder the grant money." I nodded slowly, realizing just how deep the rabbit hole went. A fake consulting company, fraudulent filings. And now we had proof. Darlene continued, "We've frozen all HOA accounts temporarily. The state auditor has approved a third-party forensic review. In the meantime, we'll be operating on a zero discretionary basis until we can identify where every cent went." Someone from the back raised a hand. "What about legal action?" That's when Penelope stood. Earlier today, the county DA's office issued subpoenas for all former board members. Pamela Whitlow, Alan Reese, and Denise Halford are each being investigated for misappropriation of public funds, false representation in zoning documents, and attempted unlawful gain through fraudulent annexation. The room fell silent. "Those are felony charges," Penelope added. "The penalties don't stop at fines. They're facing possible prison time." A low gasp rippled through the room. Even the folks who'd once defended Pamela looked shaken. After the meeting, I stood near the refreshment table, sipping lukewarm coffee. A man I didn't recognize approached, tall and broad-shouldered with a buzz cut and a neatly pressed button down. "You're Jeremiah?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, cautious. "Name's Reuben. Used to live on Hearthstone Drive. Sold my place last year after Pamela tried to slap me with a lien over a deck repair she claimed was unauthorized." I frowned. "You moved because of her," he nodded. "I was a contractor for 21 years. I followed code to the letter. She just didn't like that I used reclaimed wood." "Said it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." Penelope joined us. "You kept documentation," Reuben smiled, pulling out his phone. "Photos, receipts, even a time-stamped inspection report, passed with flying colors." "She still tried to fine me $5,000. Penelope took his information. "I'll forward this to the DA." Reuben looked relieved. "I'll testify if it helps." It did. The next week, a detective from the county white-collar crimes unit visited me at home. Detective Marler Reyes, crisp blazer and steel-toed boots, carried a leather-bound notebook and a calm, methodical demeanor. "We've reviewed the footage of Miss Whitlow on your property," she said, standing in my living room while Penelope reviewed documents beside her. Combined with the financial trail and the fraudulent zoning letter, this paints a compelling pattern of abuse of power. I nodded. So what happens now? We're moving to indict on 3 separate charges, Reyes replied. Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and destruction of property. That's just for her. The other 2 board members also have their own laundry lists. What about restitution? Penelope asked. For the fines they collected under false pretenses, Reyes closed her notebook. We're working with the state's Consumer Protection Division to determine whether those funds can be recovered and redistributed. It'll take time, but the goal is to make your community whole again. By the following weekend, the neighborhood was buzzing with updates. People were talking, organizing, helping one another with yard work, repainting fences, even starting a community garden in the old drainage lot that Pamela once claimed was too unsightly for public use. A sense of unity had taken root, stronger than anything I'd seen here in years. But the biggest surprise came the following Tuesday morning. I was walking back from the mailbox when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s, short cropped hair, gray suit, clipboard in hand. Jeremiah Palmer? She asked. That's me. She handed me a sealed envelope. You've been named as a material witness in a state-level fraud investigation. Your testimony will be requested at the preliminary hearing. My stomach flipped. When? Next month, you'll be contacted with the exact date. Thank you for your cooperation. She nodded and left just as quickly as she arrived. Inside the envelope was a formal summons and an attached summary of the charges. The state had taken over the case. Apparently, the amount of grant money funneled through the HOA exceeded $150,000, enough to trigger felony-level prosecution at the state level. And because Pamela had used her position to forge documents submitted to a zoning board, the case now included charges of falsifying government records. Penelope was already on the phone when I walked back into the house. They're moving fast, she said, placing her call on speaker. The AG's office is personally overseeing the investigation now. They contacted the zoning board, the grant issuers, even the insurance provider who pulled coverage after the vandalism. I sank into the couch, still holding the envelope. What's the end game? Penelope looked up from her notes. If convicted, Pamela could be looking at 10 years minimum. The others a little less, but still serious time, and the HOA will be placed under state supervision for at least 2 years. How does that work? They'll appoint a state monitor. All spending, fines, and board actions will be subject to oversight. No more secret votes, no more backroom deals. I looked out the window. A group of kids were riding their bikes down the street, laughing. Someone had set up a lemonade stand at the corner. It didn't feel like the same neighborhood anymore. It felt better. 2 weeks later, I testified at the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was small but packed. Pamela sat at the defense table, her expression tight, jaw clenched. Her once perfect hair hung limp, and the power suit she wore looked a size too big. I told the judge about the fine, the roses, the footage, the retaliation. Penelope supplied the grant records, zoning documents, and copies of the forged approval letter. Reuben and Mr. Chen both gave testimony too. By the time the hearing ended, the judge had set a trial date and denied bail for Pamela, citing risk of flight and potential for witness intimidation. The former board members were officially facing 9 charges between them, including embezzlement, document falsification, and retaliatory harassment. Back in Greenwood Ridge, things kept improving. The interim board held open meetings every month. Budgets were posted online. Neighbors volunteered to repaint the community signage and repair the old playground. No more fines showed up in mailboxes. And the roses? They bloomed again that spring, twice as many, in deep crimson and soft yellow, lining my walkway in perfect rows. This time, no one touched them. At the next community gathering, someone had set out a homemade sign near the refreshments. It read, "Let the roses grow." The week after the hearing, Greenwood Ridge settled into something it hadn't known in years' calm. The kind of quiet that meant no one was peering through blinds at your mailbox, no one was racing around in a golf cart with a clipboard, and no one was threatening to lien your home over mulch thickness. But calm didn't mean finished. Penelope was in my living room again, this time with a full printed copy of the forensic audit report that had just been released to the state's Office of Community Oversight. She set it on the coffee table with a weighty thud, the spine creaking under its own contents. "They found more," she said, flipping to a page near the center. "Pamela used HOA funds to pay for a private investigator." I looked up from my laptop. "For what? Not what, who, you?" I stared at her. "She paid someone to dig into your background. The report includes receipts. She had them snooping into your employment history, your mortgage, even your voter registration." She held up a photocopy of an invoice. $8,000, classified under external legal research. I stood up, pacing. "How is that even allowed?" Penelope tapped the corner of the page. "It's not. That's why the state just reclassified the case. It's no longer only a financial fraud investigation, it now includes a civil liberties violation." She opened another folder. "And that's why the Department of Justice is stepping in. This just escalated to a federal level." I sat back down slowly. "You're serious? They'll be issuing a separate indictment within the week." 2 counts: unauthorized surveillance and misuse of administrative funds to target a private citizen. You're the complainant. I stared at the open folder, my name printed in bold at the top of the DOJ memo. "I just planted flowers." Penelope gave a dry chuckle. "And brought down a corrupt HOA in the process." The next few days were a whirlwind. A federal investigator visited my home, not a low-level field agent, but Special Investigator Carla Densmore from the Dodge Civil Rights Division. A tall woman with clipped sentences and a notepad that never left her hand. She asked direct questions. Had I ever received unexplained phone calls? Did I notice anyone following me before the fine? Were there any neighbors Pamela had pressured for information about me? I told her about the time my car had been keyed, weeks before the Rose fine. I chalked it up to random vandalism at the time, but now it was looking less random. Densmore took notes with a kind of quiet intensity that made you feel like every word mattered. She didn't say much, but what she did say stuck. You're not the only one she had followed. She left me with a card and a warning not to speak to the former board members if they tried to contact me. That same afternoon, 2 unmarked government vehicles pulled into Pamela's old driveway. She'd been living in her sister's house in the next county over since the recall. They left with boxes. The following week, the interim board held their final vote before the special election that would bring in a permanent group. I wasn't planning to run, but the others had different ideas. "You're the reason this place has a future," Darlene told me as we stacked folding chairs after the meeting. "People trust you now. They know you'll never let something like that happen again." I didn't respond right away. That night, I looked around my yard. The rose bushes were thriving again, taller now, with new buds sprouting along the stems. I'd planted a few blue irises behind them just to see if they'd take. They did. I walked inside and filled out the election form. The next morning, the mail brought something I hadn't expected: a letter from Pamela's attorney. It was a settlement offer. Penelope read it aloud while stirring her coffee. "In exchange for dropping all civil complaints, she's offering to pay you $12,000 in damages and issue a written apology." I leaned back. "Why now?" "Because the federal case is airtight," she said. "Her attorney knows a conviction is almost guaranteed. She's trying to mitigate the fallout. If you settle, it'll look like she's trying to make amends. It might soften sentencing." "Do I have to respond?" "No," Penelope said, folding the letter. "But if you do, I have a better idea." We didn't take the settlement. Instead, Penelope contacted the prosecutor and the DOJ representative. The letter was submitted as evidence of acknowledgement, proof that Pamela knew she'd crossed a line and was trying to escape consequences by writing a check. 2. Weeks later, the federal indictment came down. 5 charges, including unlawful surveillance, financial misconduct, and retaliating against a whistleblower. The trial was scheduled for late summer. I spent the next month preparing for the community election. The interim board helped me set up a campaign page, and neighbors began dropping off flyers and lawn signs they'd made themselves. One even featured a cartoon rose with boxing gloves, "Let the roses grow. Let the HOA go." When election day came, turnout was higher than anyone expected. I was elected chair by a landslide. Darlene stayed on as treasurer, and Angela Morales took the role of community outreach. Our first act as an official board was to amend the bylaws to include a full transparency clause. All financial reports would be public. All fines would require a 2/3 approval and a 10-day contest period. But the biggest change was the creation of the homeowner defense clause, a new policy that allowed any resident to challenge a board decision before an independent review panel made up of fellow homeowners. No more unchecked authority, no more fear. The DOJ trial against Pamela lasted 4 days. She took the stand briefly, trying to paint herself as someone who'd lost her way under pressure, but the evidence was too solid. Emails, bank transfers, surveillance invoices, the footage of her trespassing, and the zoning documents that bore forged signatures. The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for the first 3. The other 2 former board members faced lighter sentences, 18 months each, plus restitution. And just like that, the storm was over. The neighborhood didn't just recover, it bloomed. We built a real community garden in the old drainage lot, hosted movie nights on the green, even started a tool-sharing program for lawn equipment and repairs. I kept the roses. Every spring, I plant 5 new bushes, 1 for each charge Pamela was convicted of. And every summer, they bloom in full color, lining the walk with a reminder that no one, not even the self-appointed queen of the HOA, gets to decide what's beautiful in someone else's yard.